The massive crystalline cities of Nethys floated like glowing jewels through the thick methane clouds that wrapped around their gas-giant world. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrians had lived in perfect harmony with their environment, their tall graceful bodies moving through bioluminescent structures that pulsed with life and light. Commander Hannah Kim pressed her slender fingers against the warm surface of the monitoring station's living wall. The organic computer responded to her touch, displaying streams of data about their sun's energy output in flowing patterns of blue and gold light. Everything seemed normal on this quiet morning, just as it had been for countless generations. But then the numbers began to change. Hannah's large eyes widened as she watched the readings shift in ways that made no sense. The radiation levels from their star were dropping slowly but steadily. She touched the wall again, asking for more detailed scans. The biocomputer hummed softly as it processed her request, its crystalline core glowing brighter as it worked. The results made her step backward in shock. Their sun, the source of all life in their system, was beginning to die. Not in millions of years as their scientists had predicted, but now. The star was transitioning into a red dwarf centuries ahead of schedule, and their world would soon be plunged into eternal darkness. Hannah ran through the floating corridors of the monitoring station, her feet barely touching the soft bioluminescent pathways that lit up as she moved. She had to reach the Council of Elders immediately. The other Zephyrians she passed noticed her distress and called out in concern, but she could not stop to explain. The council chamber was a vast spherical room suspended at the heart of their greatest city. Elder scientist Veltar was already there, his ancient form hunched over the central data pool. His skin, which had once glowed with brilliant patterns of light, was now dim with age and worry. "The readings are confirmed," Veltar said without looking up as Hannah entered. "Our sun is dying much faster than we ever imagined possible. Within months, maybe less, the radiation that powers our entire civilization will drop below critical levels." Other council members began arriving, their bioluminescent skin flickering with patterns of fear and confusion. Elder Zedwynra, keeper of the biocities, spoke first. "How long do we have?" "The cities are already beginning to weaken," Veltar replied, gesturing to the data streams flowing around them. "Our photosynthetic technology requires very specific wavelengths of light. As the sun changes, our power systems are failing. The great biocores that maintain our cities are starting to go dark." The reality of their situation settled over the council like a heavy blanket. Their entire civilization was based on living technology that needed their sun's unique energy to survive. Without it, everything they had built over 3 millennia would die. "We must send out distress signals," declared Elder Morthen, his usually calm voice trembling. "Surely other civilizations in the galaxy will help us." Veltar nodded grimly. "I have already begun preparing the quantum beacons. We will broadcast in every mathematical language we know, sending our pleas for help across the galaxy." Over the following weeks, as their sun grew dimmer and their cities began to fail, the Zephyrians worked desperately to save what they could. The biocores that had powered their floating cities for generations flickered and went dark one by one. The beautiful gardens that had provided them with food withered as the light they needed faded away. The quantum distress beacons launched from every remaining city, carrying messages of desperation across the vast distances between stars. The signals contained everything they could think of to attract help: their location, their situation, their willingness to share their knowledge with anyone who would save them. But as days turned to weeks, no answers came. "The Altarian Collective has received our signals," reported communications specialist Kira Nes during one of their final council meetings. "They have marked our system as a total loss. Too dangerous for rescue operations." "What about the Andromedans?" Elder Zedwynra asked hopefully. "They consider our biotechnology too primitive to be worth saving," Kira Nes replied, her skin dimming with sadness. One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy received their desperate calls for help and chose to ignore them. The rescue would be too expensive, too dangerous, or simply not worth their time and resources. As their last power reserves dwindled, Veltar made the hardest decision of his long life. "We must enter the deep stasis chambers. It is our only hope of survival." The remaining Zephyrians gathered in the lowest levels of their dying cities, where the great stasis chambers waited. These biopods could keep them alive for centuries if necessary, using the last stored energy from their failing systems. "Perhaps someone will hear our calls," Veltar said as the stasis pods began to seal around his people. "Perhaps someone out there in the galaxy will not abandon us to die alone in the darkness." The last thing Hannah saw before the stasis field took her was the dim red glow of their dying sun through the crystal walls. Then everything went dark, and the Zephyrians began their long wait for salvation that might never come. For 300 years, their signals continued to broadcast automatically across the galaxy, growing weaker with each passing year. Captain Jihoon Park rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the flickering screen in front of him. The bridge of the human exploration ship Eternal Dawn was quiet except for the steady hum of the fusion engines and the soft beeping of various monitoring systems. They had been traveling through deep space for 6 months, mapping new star systems and looking for signs of life. The distress signal appeared on his screen like a ghost from the past. It was old, very old, and the mathematical patterns were unlike anything in their databases. Jihoon leaned forward, studying the strange symbols and numbers that scrolled across his display. "Sumin, come take a look at this," he called to his navigation officer. Lieutenant Sumin Lee pushed herself away from her workstation and floated over to the captain's chair. In the low gravity of their ship, movement was more like swimming through air than walking. She looked at the signal data and frowned. "This transmission is ancient, Captain. At least 300 years old, maybe more. It's been bouncing around the galaxy for centuries." She touched the screen to bring up more details. "The source is in the Kepler 442 system, about 2 years away at maximum burn." "What does it say?" Jihoon asked. Sumin worked at her portable computer for several minutes, trying to decode the alien mathematics. "It's a distress call, definitely. Someone needs help badly. The signal contains location data and what looks like a plea for rescue." From across the bridge, Chief Engineer Minho Choi looked up from his repair work on a damaged power coupling. "Captain, Earth Command already has this signal in their database. They classified it as low priority years ago. The Altarian Collective surveyed that system decades back and marked it as a complete loss." Jihoon felt something twist in his stomach. "A loss? What does that mean?" "It means whoever sent that signal is probably dead by now," Minho said, returning to his work. "The big alien civilizations don't waste time on lost causes. If they couldn't save whoever was calling for help, then nobody can." But Jihoon could not stop thinking about the signal. He had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather about the great floods that had nearly destroyed Seoul when he was a child. His grandfather had survived only because a group of rescue workers refused to give up, even when their commanders ordered them to abandon the flooded districts. "The signal is still transmitting," Jihoon said quietly. "After all these years, it's still calling for help." Medical Officer Yuna Han drifted over from her station near the back of the bridge. "Captain, even if someone is still alive out there, a rescue mission would be incredibly dangerous. We would have to travel farther from Earth than any human ship has gone before. And our ship is not exactly built for impossible missions," added Minho. "We have basic fusion engines and emergency repair kits. The big alien races have quantum drives and technology we can barely understand. If they couldn't handle a rescue, what makes you think we can?" Jihoon looked around at his crew of 35 volunteers. They were not the best equipped or most advanced explorers in the galaxy. Their ship was held together with spare parts and determination. Their weapons were simple plasma cannons, their computers were basic, and their living quarters were cramped and uncomfortable. But they were human, and humans had a reputation in the galaxy for doing impossible things. "Remember the Titan Station rescue?" Jihoon asked his crew. Everyone said it was impossible to save those miners trapped in the asteroid belt. The Centurion Navy had given up. But Captain Martinez and her crew went anyway, and they brought home every single person. "That was different," Sumin argued. "That was in our own solar system. This would take us years away from any help or support. And the radiation levels in that system are probably deadly," Yuna added. "The Altarians have much better shielding than we do." Jihoon stood up and activated the ship's communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor and room on the Eternal Dawn. "All hands, this is the captain. Please report to the main assembly bay for a crew meeting." 20 minutes later, all 35 members of the crew had gathered in the ship's largest room. They floated in a rough circle around Jihoon, who had connected his computer to the main display screen. "We have received a very old distress signal," he began, showing them the alien mathematics on the screen. "Someone out there has been calling for help for 300 years. Every major civilization in the galaxy has ignored their calls." The crew looked at each other uncertainly. They knew what their captain was thinking, and many of them were already shaking their heads. "I know what you are all thinking," Jihoon continued. "This is crazy. We are just humans with old ships and simple technology. We have no business attempting a rescue that the advanced alien races have already given up on." He paused, looking at each of their faces. "But I keep thinking about something my grandfather used to tell me. He said that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on people, even when everyone else has written them off. Engineer Taehyung Shin raised his hand. Captain, what if we get there and find nothing but empty space? What if whoever sent that signal died centuries ago? Then at least we will know we tried, Jihoon replied. And if they are still alive, if someone is still waiting after all these years, then they deserve to know that someone in this galaxy cares enough to answer their call. The vote was close, but it was unanimous. They would go. The Eternal Dawn dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that sent loose equipment flying across the bridge. Captain Jihoon Park gripped his chair as warning lights flashed red throughout the ship. After 2 long years of travel, they had finally reached the Kepler 442 system. What they found took their breath away. My God, whispered Science Officer Naeun Park as she stared at her instruments. Look at this place. Through the main view screen, they could see the remains of what had once been a magnificent civilization. Massive crystalline structures floated like dying stars through the thick, poisonous atmosphere of the gas giant below. The buildings were bigger than anything humans had ever constructed, made of some kind of living crystal that still glowed faintly within a light. But everything was wrong. The light was too dim, too red, and getting weaker by the hour. The star is barely putting out any energy, Naeun reported, her voice filled with amazement and horror. It has become a red dwarf, and the radiation levels throughout the system are incredibly dangerous. Chief Engineer Minho Choi looked up from his damaged control panel. No wonder the other alien races marked this as impossible. Our radiation shielding is already being pushed to its limits, and we are still far from the planet. Captain Jihoon studied the floating cities below. Even dying, they were beautiful beyond anything he had ever imagined. Somewhere inside those crystal towers, people might still be alive, waiting for rescue after 3 centuries of silence. Can we get down there? He asked. Minho ran calculations on his computer while sweat beaded on his forehead. Maybe. If we use our hull plating as a heat shield and reconfigure the magnetic field generators, we might be able to survive atmospheric entry. But Captain, this will destroy our ship. We will not be able to leave. What about using the mining equipment? Suggested Engineer Taehyung Shin. We could modify the boring lasers to cut through their city walls. Medical Officer Yunahan was already working at her station, trying to understand the alien technology from the faint energy signatures her sensors were detecting. I am picking up very weak life signs from several of the structures. Whatever these beings are, some of them are still alive. Jihoon made his decision. All hands, prepare for atmospheric entry. We did not come this far to turn back now. The descent into the planet's atmosphere was like flying through hell. The Eternal Dawn groaned and screamed as the radiation storms battered their improvised heat shielding. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, and the temperature inside the ship rose to dangerous levels. Hull temperature critical. Minho shouted over the noise. We are going to cook if this takes much longer. Emergency cooling systems are failing, added Taehyung, his hands flying over his controls as he tried to keep their ship together. But somehow, through a combination of human engineering and pure stubbornness, they made it through. The Eternal Dawn crashed into one of the floating cities with a sound like thunder, their damaged hull tearing through the crystal walls. Emergency lights flickered on as the crew picked themselves up from the deck. They were alive, but their ship would never fly again. Atmosphere outside is toxic, Yuna reported as she checked her instruments. We will need full environmental suits. The interior of the alien city was like walking through a dying forest made of crystal and light. Beautiful organic curves and flowing lines surrounded them, but everything was growing dark. The bioluminescent walls that had once provided light and power were fading away. Over here, called Communications Officer Jiwon Nam. She had found what looked like a control room, with strange organic computers that still flickered with weak energy. Naeun worked with her portable scanner, trying to understand the alien technology. These are incredible. The entire city is alive, like one giant organism. But it is starving without the right kind of sunlight. They followed energy readings deeper into the city, using cutting tools to break through sealed doors and collapsed passages. The architecture was amazing, with rooms that seemed to grow naturally from the walls and corridors that curved like branches of a tree. Finally, they found what they were looking for. The stasis chamber was enormous, filled with hundreds of pod-like structures arranged in perfect rows. Most of the pods were dark and cold, but a few dozen still glowed with faint inner light. Life signs, Yuna whispered, scanning the active pods. Weak, but definitely alive. Through the transparent walls of the nearest pod, they could see their first alien. It was tall and graceful, with pale skin that seemed to glow from within. Its features were delicate and beautiful, but it looked very fragile. 4 to 7 active pods, nay uncounted. Out of what looks like thousands. Jihoon felt his heart break a little. An entire civilization had been reduced to less than 50 survivors. Can we wake them up? He asked. Yuna was already working, trying to interface her medical equipment with the alien technology. I think so, but I need to understand their biology first. If I make a mistake, I could kill them. Then we better get to work, Jihoon said. We did not come all this way to let them die now. The crew spread out through the chamber, each taking responsibility for several pods. Using a combination of human medical knowledge and careful experimentation, they began the delicate process of reviving beings who had been asleep for 3 centuries. The first alien opened its large, dark eyes and looked directly at Captain Jihoon Park. In that moment, across the vast differences of species and culture, 2 beings who had never met before shared a perfect understanding. The humans had kept their promise. After 300 years, someone had finally answered their call for help. The journey back to human space began with 4 to 7 rescued Zephyrians crammed into a ship designed for 35 humans. The Eternal Dawn limped away from the dying system with its hull patched by emergency repairs and its life support systems pushed far beyond safe limits. Captain Jihoon Park watched his crew work miracles with spare parts and determination. Engineer Taehyung Shin had somehow managed to get their damaged engines running again, though they made terrible grinding noises and threw sparks every few hours. The ship shook constantly, and warning lights blinked on every control panel. Captain, we have a problem, reported Medical Officer Yuna Han during their second week of travel. Our food supplies will not last long enough to reach Earth. Not with this many people on board. The rescued Zephyrians were still very weak from their long sleep. Their leader, an ancient scientist named Veltar, had explained through gestures and simple drawings that his people had been in stasis for over 300 years. Most of them could barely walk, and their bioluminescent skin remained dim and pale. We will manage, Jihoon told his crew during their daily meeting. We have survived worse situations before. Food Officer Hyojin Seo had been working day and night to stretch their supplies. She mixed water with protein powder to make thin soup and divided their emergency rations into smaller and smaller portions. The humans began eating only once a day so the aliens could have enough nutrition to recover their strength. Your people are starving themselves for us, Veltar said to Jihoon one evening. The old Zephyrian had learned some basic human words by listening to the crew talk. His voice was like soft music, even when speaking a foreign language. We will all make it home together, Jihoon replied simply. That is what we do. The Zephyrians watched in amazement as the humans refused to let impossible problems defeat them. When their water recycling system broke down, engineer Minho Choi built a new one using parts from broken computers and emergency medical supplies. When the artificial gravity failed, the crew just learned to work in zero gravity and helped their alien guests adapt to floating through the corridors. But the most remarkable thing the humans did was share their stories. During the long dark hours between star systems, when there was nothing to do but wait and hope their patched-up ship would hold together, the crew gathered in the main assembly bay with their alien guests. Communications Officer Jiwon Nam had learned enough of the Zephyrian language to act as translator. Tell us about your world, Veltar asked one evening as they floated in a circle around the room's dim emergency lights. So the humans told them about Earth. About blue skies and green forests, about cities that grew from the ground instead of floating in the air. They talked about the great wars that had nearly destroyed their planet, and how they had learned to work together to heal the damage. We almost lost everything once, explained Captain Jihoon. Our oceans rose and our cities flooded. Many people said it was hopeless, that we should just give up and accept that our world was dying. But you did not give up, Veltar observed. No. We are too stubborn for that, Jihoon smiled. We learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to quit, even when everyone else says it is impossible. The Zephyrians began sharing their own stories in return. They told the humans about their floating cities and their living technology that grew like plants. They described art forms made of light and music that could make crystals sing. They spoke sadly about the millions of their people who had died when their sun began to fail. Your civilization was so advanced, said Science Officer Neon Park with wonder in her voice. Your biotechnology is centuries ahead of anything we have. Advanced, yes, Veltar replied thoughtfully. But we never learned what your species knows instinctively. When our world was dying, we could only call for help and hope someone would answer. We did not know how to save ourselves. But you sent out those signals for 300 years, pointed out Engineer Shin. you never stopped hoping. Hope and action are different things, the old Zephyrian said. You did not just hope we could be saved. You came and saved us. Week by week, as their damaged ship crawled through space toward human territory, something beautiful began to happen. The rescued Zephyrians grew stronger, and their skin began to glow with faint patterns of light again. But more importantly, they began to understand something about their rescuers. These humans were not the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology was simple, their ships were crude, and their knowledge of science was limited compared to the great alien civilizations. But they had something much more valuable than advanced technology. They had the absolute conviction that no one should be abandoned to die alone in the darkness. You know, Veltar told Captain Jihoon one day as they watched Engineer Choi coax another impossible repair from their failing systems. The great civilizations of the galaxy ignored our distress calls because they calculated that saving us would cost too much. They weighed our lives against their resources and decided we were not worth the expense. That must have been very painful, Jihoon replied. It was. But now I understand something important. Your people do not make those calculations. When someone calls for help, you simply go and help them. You do not ask if it is profitable or convenient or safe. Jihoon thought about this for a moment. Someone has to answer when people are in trouble. If we do not help each other, then what is the point of having all this technology and knowledge? As their ship finally entered the outer edges of human space, the Zephyrians knew they were not just returning to safety. They were joining something much more important than an advanced civilization. They were becoming part of a community that refused to let anyone face the darkness alone. 3 months after the Eternal Dawn limped into Earth's orbital docking station, the story of the Zephyrian rescue had spread across the entire galaxy. News reporters from dozens of different alien species crowded around the medical center where the 47 survivors were slowly recovering their strength. Captain Jihoon Park found the attention uncomfortable. He stood in the hospital corridor, watching through a window as Dr. Yunbai Lim worked with Veltar to understand Zephyrian biology. The old alien scientist was teaching the human doctors about his people's unique physiology while learning about human medical techniques in return. Captain Park, how does it feel to be a galactic hero? Asked a reporter from the Altarian News Network. The tall blue alien held a recording device that glowed with soft light. We are not heroes, Jihoon replied quietly. We just answered a distress call. That is what anyone should do. But the galaxy did not see it that way. The major civilizations were studying the mission reports with confusion and amazement. How had such a primitive species succeeded where advanced races had failed? The humans had used crude fusion engines instead of elegant quantum drives. They had patched their ship with spare parts instead of using sophisticated repair systems. By all logical calculations, they should have died in the attempt. The Altarian Collective released a statement saying they were reviewing their rescue protocols in light of human innovations. The Andromedans began sending delegations to Earth to study human psychology. Even the proud Centaurian Empire admitted they were interested in understanding the human approach to impossible situations. But the real changes were happening in the medical center, where humans and Zephyrians worked together every day. Dr. Veltar had recovered enough strength to walk around the hospital, his bioluminescent skin now glowing with healthy patterns of blue and gold. He spent hours with Dr. Lim and her research team, sharing knowledge about Zephyrian biotechnology. Your healing techniques are amazing, Dr. Lim said as she watched Veltar demonstrate how to grow living bandages from modified plant cells. This could revolutionize medicine across the galaxy. And your surgical methods are so precise, Veltar replied, examining a human medical scanner with wonder. My people never learned to fix problems by cutting and rebuilding. We only knew how to grow and guide natural healing. The combination of human and Zephyrian knowledge began producing incredible results. Diseases that had plagued both species for centuries suddenly became curable. The humans learned to grow organs and tissues using Zephyrian biotechniques. The Zephyrians discovered how human surgical methods could repair damage that their own medicine could not heal. But the most important work was happening in the agricultural research labs. Engineer Minho Choi had been working with a young Zephyrian named Kira Nes to adapt their bioarchitecture for use on human worlds. The floating cities that had once graced the methane clouds of Nethys could be modified to grow in Earth's atmosphere using human fusion reactors for power. Look at this, Kira Nes said excitedly, her skin flickering with patterns of bright green as she showed Minho her latest design. If we combine your fusion technology with our biocores, we can create cities that actually clean the air around them while they grow. The first prototype biostructure was built in orbit around Earth's moon. It was small compared to the great Zephyrian cities, but it was beautiful beyond anything humans had ever created. The living walls glowed with soft light, and the corridors seemed to breathe with organic life. Plants grew directly from the floors and walls, providing food and oxygen while beautiful crystalline formations created art that changed and evolved over time. "It is like living inside a living thing," marveled Captain Jihoon as he toured the new structure with Veltar. "But it feels safe and comfortable, not alien or strange." "That is because it was designed by both our species working together," Veltar explained. "Neither humans nor Zephyrians could have created this alone. It required both your practical engineering and our understanding of living systems." As word of their success spread, other species began to take notice. The galactic community realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their military power. It was their willingness to help others, even at great cost to themselves. 6 months after the rescue, Captain Jihoon received a priority message on his personal communicator. It was another distress signal, this time from a system near the galactic rim. A species called the Morvac had been trapped on their dying world for 50 years, and their automated beacon had just reached human space. "The Altarians say it is too dangerous," reported Communications Officer Jiwon Nam during their briefing. "The Andromedans calculate that a rescue would require more resources than the Morvac could ever repay." Jihoon looked around at his crew, many of whom had volunteered to stay together after their successful mission. They were no longer flying the Eternal Dawn, which had finally been retired after its heroic service. Their new ship was bigger and better equipped, built using both human and Zephyrian technology. "What do you think, Veltar?" Jihoon asked the old scientist, who had chosen to join their crew as a permanent member. Veltar's skin glowed with warm patterns of gold and blue. "I think someone is calling for help, and we are the ones who answer those calls." The joint human-Zephyrian rescue fleet launched 3 days later, carrying with them a simple message that was already spreading across the galaxy. In the vast darkness of space, no one had to face their troubles alone. Someone would always come looking for the lost. As their ships disappeared into hyperspace, heading toward another impossible rescue, the galaxy began to understand what humanity had brought to the stars. Not just advanced technology or military might, but something far more valuable: hope.